Escape to the metaverse, better act like you know. Yeah, you are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah, escape to the metaverse, better act like you know. Yeah, you are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah, escape to the metaverse, better act like you know. You are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah, escape to the metaverse, better act like you know. You are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah.
Hey everyone, before we begin this week's episode of the Matthew and Rizzle Show, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Proof of Beauty. Proof of Beauty is an experimental digital experience studio. The blockchain is their canvas and the tokens are their brush. You can learn more about Proof of Beauty by checking out pob.studio. You can follow them on Twitter as well at PRRF Beauty. That's PRRF Beauty on Twitter and pob.studio on their homepage to learn more about their projects like Hash, London, and Publico. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Okay, Marshall, welcome to the Matthew and Rizzle Show.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, stoked to have you. Really excited to talk about KGP NFT and NFT photography in general. Just such a hot topic item in the space. But before we get into that, I'm really curious to kind of get to know you a little bit more, your background, where you're coming from, what brought you into crypto, Web3, NFT land, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm an actively working photographer, although these days, as things kind of ramp up, I'm on assignment less and less. But I've been making my living as a photographer for about 15 years now. And, I'm located in Las Vegas, Nevada. I still do a ton of traveling though. So it's kind of been a hub for me for the past 10 years as I kind of move around the place. I went to undergraduate with Kris Graves in New York City, which is kind of how we met many years ago. And then I did my graduate work in Connecticut, in Hartford. And I've really kind of just had a traditional kind of photo career up until, the past kind of 2 years where I went to school and, I worked in editorial capacity and commercial capacity. And, I exhibited like my art in museum and galleries and sold prints and made books and did all of that. But I'd say around 2017, 2016, I started doing some assignments and stuff that revolved around what was going on, in the DeFi world. And I started getting into kind of dipping my toes into the crypto realms. And, I started holding my first tokens around like 2016, 2017 and, kind of experienced all that. But it wasn't until it's funny because I say I came in late, but if you ask other people in the space, they kind of guffaw at, I came in like January 2021 into the NFT space. And that's when I was seeing the first people really get rolling with photo. And it's just been kind of a wild, wild road ever since.
Dude, I feel like NFT photography, specifically compared to art, has like sort of taken a while to get off the ground. Although now I feel like it's sort of hit like a huge upswing. But you were in early enough, man, to see like sort of how that has all played out over time. And would be interested in like hearing your perspective on like, why that sort of took like a little bit longer to catch on. Why like maybe it's I don't want to say caught a hype cycle, but maybe just like finally getting the credit that it is due or the place that it deserves within the NFT scene?
Yeah, sure. It's, so it was really interesting. I was super lucky as far as like how I learned how to, literally I was shown how to mint by like Justin Aversano and Kris Graves in, January of last year, 2021. And so I was watching these guys put stuff up on OpenSea, like, and, just calling them, being like, what are you guys doing? And then like, I was like, I kind of watched what was happening with Kris. I watched what was happening with Justin. Those dudes found some traction in the CryptoPunks Discord and like, got some of those collectors to come over and start buying their photography. And we just kind of like, we're all just discussing in the background, like, this is, this is real. Like, this is legit. Like, this is happening. And as soon as that like initial kind of ETH started pouring in for us, we started immediately having these discussions of like, okay, like, where is this going? What can we do to contribute to it? What can we build kind of in parallel to what we see happening that's going to provide value to the space? So it was very much we went from 0 to 100 real fast in that month period, basically, of taking it serious to taking it very, very serious. But the cool thing about the photo space is that, yeah, it's like, it was definitely the Wild West back, in early 2021. That was like, I remind people, it's like that was before Foundation was like up and running. Like, you were on OpenSea, or you were trying to get on Nifty Gateway, or like maybe you were playing around with Super Rare. And so it was an entirely different ecosystem. And as we kind of got into spring, we saw more photography come in. We saw more photography have sex. I wish photography had sex.
It does, man.
I knew you loved photography. I didn't know you loved photography.
No. That's so funny. I was in a space the other day that was talking about the history of pornography, and there was like a debate about like where like erotic nudes have a place in the NFT space. And it was like a very interesting, important discussion, but it's obviously still lingering in my head. So in spring, Eversano sold out, Twin Flames, and those things started going on the secondary market, for 4 ETH, 5 ETH, climbing up there to 10 ETH. Little did we know we'd make it all the way up to over 100. Same thing, Drift's work was like starting to get collected and get pretty popular, and that was building up. A lot of landscape photographers initially were very successful transitioning into the space because they were the most well-suited, in my opinion, to kind of like sell their one-to-ones at a high price range, because the work was very accessible. You could just be like, hey, this is the banger landscape I took of my collection. It's 2 ETH, it's 3 ETH, it's 5 ETH. And, a collector was very much, didn't have to really know much more about that other than the personal story. They could gravitate towards it. But yeah, as we moved on, like we definitely gotten to a point where, people are openly kind of discussing, saying, this is really photography's time in the space. I have some differing opinions on that as far as what that really means, but I think that it's true in the sense that people that haven't been collecting photography up to this point, they're getting excited about trying to navigate into the space and get into it.
So I'm kind of curious. After that initial sort of like blast off with Justin, Twin Flames, Drifter kind of being like super hot right now, where do you see NFT photography today? Right, there's all the keen interest. Obviously there's some larger collectors who are collecting at extremely high valuations, certain group or subset of photographers, right? But like, where is the landscape? Like, how settled are things? How unsettled are things? Curious, like the lay of the land from your perspective today, and then where KGP NFT kind of comes in to the state of things.
Yeah, it is still very much the Wild West. People have kind of corralled their efforts into some specific channels. So we're simultaneously starting to see the success of some of these curated platforms and groups, while at the same time we're seeing more kind of traditional blue chip names come into the space. I mean, as we're talking, Alex Soth, who's one of the biggest names in contemporary photography, I would argue the past 30 years, is doing his first drop with Assembly. So we're starting to see the real heavy hitters come in from the blue chip space and start to debut at these platforms. Assembly, Fellowship, Quantum is insane. Quantum is a juggernaut. That's a curated platform that does one-to-one drops every week. And they literally put an artist out and they sell them out in, a minute, 2 minutes. They have an incredibly strong community and stable of buyers that really just support whoever they bring to the table. So
what's Quantum's web address?
I believe it's quantum.art. Let me pull it up real quick. And full disclosure, Kris Graves, one of our founders, is a curator for Quantum. But yeah, what they're doing with that platform is pretty ridiculous, as far as like the success they've had and their ability to just constantly introduce new artists to the space on a weekly basis and bring them kind of immediate success into that ecosystem. But if you're not on one of these curated platforms in this space and you're an artist, you're really kind of looking at, you're trying to make that initial decision of like, do I have the capital to kind of mint on the ETH, or am I going to explore Tezos? And if you're minting on ETH, you're looking at OpenSea, or you're looking at Foundation. A lot of people regard Foundation as having the more kind of robust ecosystem as far as like the details around the smart contract and the provenance of the collectors and stuff. I ran a space yesterday with collectors who all basically publicly said like, I'm not going to tell anybody to burn anything on OpenSea and migrate it to Foundation or vice versa. Like I will collect you if I want to collect you. It's not specifically to the platform. So I think there's a little bit of a like scary myth kind of stuff around that. But, there are people who do specifically collect on Foundation, but it is just it's more prohibitive cost wise. So if you're an artist, it's really like whether or not like you can explore one of these curated platforms, or if you're going to kind of go the road of kind of self-promotion. But there's a lot of things being introduced, in that realm. But if you're a buyer or you want to get into photography, I actually was having this discussion with a bunch of collectors yesterday. I don't think it's easy as we all think it is in our little photo echo chamber for people to come into the space as collectors and find the work they want to find. Mm-hmm. Because you can go to Quantum, you could go to Fellowship, you could go to Assembly, and you could see the curated artists that bring to the table and tune into spaces. But honestly, if you don't kind of if you're not keen to that, you're really just kind of wading through the Twitter sphere and like a couple different Discords, just kind of see like, how do I find the artists, that I'm looking for? Where do I get into photography? Like, the one-to-one valuations are very nice for us, like for the artists, like they're getting artists paid and they're great. But if you don't know anything about photography, you might be a little gun shy about, dropping an ETH on, a photograph of an artist that you're really not familiar with. So what we kind of decided like early on last spring is we realized like these platforms are built all around one-to-ones, because one-to-ones are built around suiting the needs of the kind of initial digital artists that came into the space and PFP projects. And that's great. There was a big debate yesterday about, the value of PFPs versus photographs. I can't yell this loud enough from the rooftops. PFPs being successful generate the funds in the wallets of the collectors that then pivot over into the realms of different art that they want to support, whether that be painting, digital art, photography. So people doing well off, speculative value on PFPs has been what's helped push the space, hyperbolic. So I'm all for that. But what we realize is like these marketplaces are all built around one-to-ones. They're not built to showcase artists in any way. You know what I mean? Like as artists, we have all this backstory. We make these lengthy projects that take years, that have 40 images, 50 images. There's a whole backstory about it. That's why we put books out. We put books out because it's a story, somebody spent all this time making this thing. There's like essays that go with it. There's documents, there's behind the scenes and stuff. And also, we want to present the work to you in the capacity of like, hey, here's my body of work. This is me as an artist, check it out. If you like it, support me. Maybe you want to buy one of my one-to-ones, or you want to collect something else of mine. So we saw like very early on last spring that with these marketplaces that they were going to continue to dictate the terms of how artists were presenting themselves to collectors, and they were going to be built around this one-to-one ecosystem. And so we realized if we could kind of build our own little lane in the space where we could provide artists with the ability to kind of put their whole story out there, present themselves all at once, and we priced it at an entry point that was more accessible to collectors for what they were used to seeing in more kind of, PFP spaces. We could give them an entry point and say like, hey, why don't you want to take like a chance on photography? You want to like check it out? Like, well, hey, you're not going to get burned on, this entry point, as far as like, what you're used to. And like, we're going to present you with something really cool. We're going to give you like an entire artist story. We're going to build traits around it as well. And like, this is like an entry point for you to kind of access photography. And like, if you dig it, like you can go in and start collecting one-to-ones if you want then too.
Can you unpack the traits, how you add them to the art? Like, what does that actually mean? Actually, it's hard for me to understand.
Yeah. So getting into kind of the nitty-gritty of the books, the important thing for us when we realized, we kind of had these discussions about, we saw what one-to-ones did for photographs. We're used to selling photographic prints in galleries in like numbers of like 4 or 6 or 10. And the whole idea is they're numbered, they're signed, they exist in a limited capacity. So there's scarcity, so they're commodity. So they have inherent speculative value by the fact that they're limited. Mm-hmm. The same thing happens with photo books and art books, because they're so expensive to make, and they're kind of like, they're seen as collector's items, and they're very kind of ornate and nice. Usually books are made anywhere between like 300 to 1,000. Same thing. They're numbered. They're like, rare ones are definitely like numbered and signed. They exist as commodity. They sell on secondary markets. They have that same exact ecosystem as prints do. So when we realized that there was nothing that had been built that was going to allow us to transition art books into the space yet, we realized that was like this inroad that we could take to make happen. And what I mean by that is like, so traditionally, like our Web 2 idea of what a book means in a digital space is, you click on a button and an invisible gate lifts, and you get access to like a PDF behind this paywall that's the same PDF that a million other people have access to. Yeah. So you've technically bought a book, quote unquote, Web 2, but you don't own anything. So for us, the realization was that if we really put the legwork in and we make these unique editions, what I mean by that is we tokenize books that are numbered, signed, and they have unique traits that affect, what they are, how they exist, then we're literally handing over an item to someone that they own. So, I mean, it's like you can view it, you can interact with it, but not only that, like it's yours to sell on a secondary marketplace if you want. It's yours to hold if you want. It's yours to stake. You can do whatever you want with it. It is you actually own a digital book. And so we kind of took some keys from, what was happening with PFP projects, where we realized it's like, okay, like the sky's the limit for us as far as like what we want to build into these books. Like if the whole idea is we're treating every single book like it's coming off a digital printing press, where it's getting handmade, hand signed, hand numbered, the traits that are affecting what it is are being kind of, doled out based on the scale that we make, but they're all being minted individually. So what we did is we decided, well, we have all this content, as artists that, come from making a book, whether it's like images that were like lost on the editing room floor, like alternate essays, extended edition, alternate covers, like promo materials and posters that went around with like the exhibitions or, the promotion of the book, to video interviews, audio, music. We have all this extra content that never sees the light of day because we're limited to the physical production traditionally and the prohibitive cost of that. So what we realized is like, hey, well, like not only should we just make these books like unique in the sense that they're literally tokenized, they're like handmade, hand numbered, hand signed, they exist in that unique way. Why don't we take this 3-step further and learn from the success of these PFP projects, and like, why don't we build out all this kind of like, trait value into them? So that's when it became an idea of like, okay, let's like, how far can we push it? And so we took it to the point where it's like, with our first release, I think the numbers are around like about 50 of those editions are going to end up having one-to-ones attached to them. And so that's like for the life of that book, whoever owns it, when they look at it in a secondary marketplace or, a gallery space or a metaverse space, they're going to see that one-to-one. And then they go to our site and they go on our viewer and they can read the book and see the one-to-one there as well. But the whole idea is attaching kind of like, these incentives to the book where like, that's a really cool entry point. There's going to be people that don't own a single photography NFT that, buy one of our books and they end up with a one-to-one and all of a sudden they're a photography collector. So we're really kind of excited about kind of like giving people this entry point to kind of come into the space and suddenly find themselves as like being collectors in photography.
So just to clarify too, when you're buying one of these digital books and it contains like limited editions, maybe one-of-ones, will the individual who buys the actual digital book be able to sell individually, like the one-of-one that they've collected? Are you selling collections that are called books? I'm just trying to grok the actual concept a little bit clearer.
Yeah, for sure. So think of it straight up as like, it's more extensive than this, but think of it as you're buying like a tokenized PDF. That's where we started. So what you own is like, think of it in this term, like there exists this base kind of PDF that we started from. That's like, let's say that's the collection of the 44 images that traditionally go into the book. From there, each PDF gets numbered, gets signed, the alternate, the extended pages come in, the alternate covers come in, all this stuff gets built out of that. But what you own essentially is you own the work in book format. You don't own the one-to-ones individually as like a collection. You're not buying like 44 one-to-ones. But what you do have the possibility of owning is we are attaching actual one-to-one provenance to book editions. So for, say, if you pull one of the books that comes with one of the one-to-one rarity traits, on secondary marketplaces, in your gallery spaces, you own that one-to-one. As long as you own that book, you own the one-to-one associated with it. If you pull one of the editions that doesn't have a one-to-one, you own what other traits are associated with it. But it's not a one-to-one catalog. It is just a body of work in totality.
It's cool, man. I feel like I'm probably like fall amongst your like target audience. I appreciate photography, but I do find like the NFT photography scene like a little bit daunting as someone who just hasn't been exposed to a ton of the prominent artists or up and coming artists. So, as someone who would be like, potentially interested in this thing, like, can you give us some like brass tacks in terms of like, what is like the lowest barrier to entry? Like, as someone who's just like genuinely interested in being like exposed to enough stuff as possible to get a sense of what's going on, are these like mostly up and coming photographers? Are these established photographers? Is it a mix of like all of those things? What would be like the best place for someone like me who's like interested but wouldn't really know where to start?
Yeah, for sure. So that's, we've literally kind of built this around that idea that it's like, we're eventually going to have to create an olive branch for these artists to the rest of the space. I mean, there's so many people that don't live in the photo echo chamber that we kind of inhabit. And so it's going to be a mix of introducing established artists to people. I'm pretty active in the photo space, and I've had some success with my one-to-ones. And, our second title is going to be Kris Graves, who's, he's sold out multiple collections. Like I said, he curates for quantum art. So he's going to be the second book title. Those are also going to have one-to-ones attached to those editions. And the artists we're going to introduce after that, we're kind of taking a model of where every title we shake it up a little bit. We either want to bring in somebody that's established in the space, for outside collectors to see and feel comfortable kind of entering in, or we want to introduce somebody brand new with a mechanic to that title that's going to be kind of like something wild and innovative, whether that be like, audio tracks or video tracks or motion or time. But, for outside collectors, it's a daunting place to start because it's like, the one-to-one valuations go for, a lot of my work goes for anywhere between 0.6 and 2 ETH. And, Kris's work goes from anywhere between 0.6 and, 10, 15 ETH. And so what we've kind of taken the approach of is like, we're going to give that opportunity for you to come in at a price point that's like not going to, it's not going to put you in a position where you're like, I don't know if this is for me. We're kind of incentivized in the sense of like, come give it a dabble. And so if someone trying to kind of get into this space and explore it, I always kind of say, I think that, following what Quantum is doing is a really good entry point. And honestly, everything right now is happening in the Twitter spaces and the Discord, which is hard to navigate. But we're kind of hoping that, by doing this, it's going to give kind of the ability for people to show, other collectors like, hey, check out my book. You know what I mean? Like, come check out photography.
I love that. In a space that, because of the hype that we're in right now, like the entry point for a casual collector or someone who wants to kind of get their feet wet, just quickly like got out of their reach. And it sounds like this is an approach that's taking and giving a nod to the old way or the old world of photography with like these incredibly like lush custom photography books that people keep on like their coffee tables, and kind of using that as this entryway. I actually really do love that. And then baking in sort of these rarity traits and allowing some folks to get these like one-of-ones if they get super lucky. I think that's really cool, actually. Zooming out a little bit, I'm just wondering if you can kind of lend your taste and sensibility as a photographer and a collector of photography for someone new. Like, what do you look for when you're looking at photography, and what do you consider like fine photography art versus something that looks really good on Instagram, for example? Curious, like how you approach the space as a collector.
Nice. Yeah. And to your point though, as far as the books, the other thing that we're kind of, we're seeing this happen too, is like we're going to be in a world in 5 years where it's like the amount of people that can have, book storage in their apartments and coffee tables is going to be diminishing in vast numbers versus the time they spend in their digital spaces. So we're integrating into tablet usage as well and everything like that. So we literally want to be like your coffee book, photo book purveyor. We just want to have it be accessible on all your devices and your digital spaces. But as far as what I look for, see, this is kind of interesting because it's like it's what kind of it led us to creating what we're doing, because like I come from this very traditional fine arts background in photography where I'm used to I've been through 2 rounds of higher education and exhibited in museums and galleries and done all that stuff and played in these proper channels and stuff. So it's like I have this, this history of photography all in my head as far as like what I've been fortunate enough to do all that. So what are the things I look for in photography are the things that kind of excite me in the face of all of that. And what I mean by that is like I can be drawn, of course, to like individual images that I think are dope. Like, don't get me wrong, like I'm very much like if a photograph looks cool, like I'm gonna look at it. But for me, what I really resonate with is I like work that usually is part of a series, a group of images that have some sort of narrative to them, as far as whether it's something that was made in like a documentary mode, maybe by an artist that went and did a project about a place or a space or a group of people, or even if it's just if it's a group of images that, have been manipulated or whatever, that are kind of speaking towards, an artist's story or their emotion. I love work that I find in those bodies as a whole. Like if I really like the project in totality, like if I like the story behind it, if I like what it's trying to say, what it's trying to do, then I'll spend time with the group of images as a whole. And from there, I'll kind of come away with the ones that resonate with me individually. So my photography, my personal collection is really a group of images that are from bodies of work that I've kind of fallen in love with. And then I kind of go into the body of work. I find the few images that are like really the ones that kind of like make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And like, those are the ones that I want to collect, because like, not only do I have an attachment to the artist, to the story as a whole, but then I find kind of like my own personal relation to the individual image in that series that like really, really resonates with me. And so that's kind of how I approach usually finding the work. And so, of course, I mean, naturally, we make books. We want to introduce books because that's how I find those images. Like I buy artist books. I read their whole story because I don't really go to a lot of gallery shows anymore, which is kind of the same concept. So I buy the book. I go through the whole artist story. If I really dig it, if I dig the artist, then I go after, one of the one-to-ones in the book. And I put that into the collection. So that's usually kind of how I go about finding it. And so that's, of course, kind of what drew us to it. But yeah, but that's not to like poo-poo on any, photographers that are working kind of strictly in making one-to-ones. There's a lot of people, especially that work in landscapes, that do that approach. And I think that's valid, but we've seen kind of like how we've seen how that approach was very much kind of like, I don't want to say taken over, but I want to say manipulated by platforms like Instagram, where it was all about just like, we're going to compensate you someday through exposure, even though we all know that's never really going to happen now. But so just give us the most hyper manipulated, in your face banger of an image that someone's going to see for 5 seconds, maybe. And, like serve it up to them on a silver platter. And like, so we kind of got tricked into that model. And I think that unfortunately we're now kind of backpedaling on that, trying to introduce to collectors that don't really know photography. Hey, like, it's not just about this individual image. Like it's about, everything this artist is making, in a whole. So I think we're actively kind of right now working to bring people's focus back to what it was before that.
Having gone from like, sort of a more traditional photography background to, sort of entering into, the, tech forefront, I guess, of things in terms of like NFTs and everything. Do you find that the audiences have like different tastes? Like is, for example, like what's, popular now in the traditional, photography world different than what you see NFT collectors collecting, or is there like a lot of overlap? Or I'd just be interested in like, what sort of trends you see depending on like the audiences and, where they are within like the tech spectrum.
100%. When I talk to people that are skittish about coming into the space, I actually use this. Some people are like, when I tell them, people that collect my photography in the space have no background in photography. And they're like, oh, well, that sounds like a nightmare. Like, how would I, I'm so used to like these gallerists and these, traditional collectors and everything like that. And I tell them, I'm like, no, like you're missing the forest for the tree. You're dealing with an entire new audience of people who are trying to collect art that don't have years of this kind of like beaten down, like, this is what you're supposed to like. This is what you're supposed to gravitate towards. This is what you're supposed to hold value to. I'm like, this is like everything we ever dreamed of. It's the opportunity to find this entire new audience in this digital space. And so with that, though, comes the flip side of that, which is in the space. And I have this discussion with collectors all the time. Everyone's learning as they go. Like a lot of the prominent photography collectors in the space are, they've always been fans of photography, but they don't have the backgrounds of the artists. They're kind of learning and finding these artists as they go. And so there's a lot of signaling in the space right now. The best advice I can kind of give to anybody as far as like what to lean into or what to kind of where to look is like, I always tell people, you follow some of these prominent artists in the space, because you'll see what the artists are collecting. You'll see the collectors kind of watching to see what the artists are collecting. And there's kind of this signaling going on behind the scenes of like, oh man, well, if these artists that I really respect are all going after this person's work and, like retweeting it or championing it, like, there's got to be something there. Like, I need to check this out. So what we're seeing play out is we're seeing a lot of these initial artists that got, some ETH at the get-go and started kind of reinvesting it into the ecosystem. We're seeing them kind of build up these kind of signaling platforms. I mean, hell, Quantum, Fellowship, Assembly, these curated platforms all were started by artists that had early success in spring and winter of 2021. It all came from that. And so they're starting to introduce these people. But the counterpoint for the established artists too is if you don't put the legwork in, or if you're not kind of on, one of these platforms that's going to really, really kind of head to toe get you going. Like I've seen artists that are huge names in the traditional space kind of come in and everyone's kind of like, okay, cool. And, they're not hyper present as far as like in these conversations and in the spaces. And you'll see the space kind of, the space moves at 100 miles an hour. So space moves on in 5 minutes, like if you're not there. So it's definitely right now a mix of like, you have to be in the mix, because it's as more and more people come into the space and get involved, there has to be there has to be that ecosystem complementing it of secondary sales and new collectors coming in. And so there has to be kind of that bridging of that gap, to be able to connect those people.
I love that.
To touch on too, we had a big discussion just the other day with a bunch of collectors. We were talking about kind of the digital spaces too, as far as like collectors now have these galleries that they're putting up on Gallery, on Cyber, CryptoVoxels, Citrus. And so now there's kind of this other thing that's happening where it's like they're starting to like exhibit their collections in digital spaces. And so there's a lot of discussion now around kind of how that's going to operate as far as like, okay, like how do we start doing photography shows, in these digital spaces where we invite people from all these other communities and say like, hey, come check it out. It functions in similar ways as books in the sense where it's like, come check out this photography group show that, this collector or these artists curated, where there's like 30 artists like in this space that are dope, like come walk through the gallery, check out all their work. So there's a lot of discussion right now about like, what do we do, as stewards and ambassadors to kind of our lane in the NFT space to bridge the gap for everybody and say like, hey, like make it accessible, like come check this out. Like we all know that it's like, we're getting to that point where it's like, no one has the time anymore to like really like delve into all these different lanes, at the speed that they're going. So we have to make it more accessible.
100%. And being an open book, no pun intended, in relation to this project is really important. Allowing people the access and accessibility to kind of come in with their curious hat on and fall into these spaces and listen to the photographers, the collectors, talk openly about what's going on and kind of just letting everyone know that they too, if they want, could be a part of this whole space. I think we can't do that enough at this point. And it just, in my mind, thinking about how like the old fine art world was and still is in large part as this like dated ivory tower-esque, like super exclusive club of Richie Rich folks that's just totally inaccessible to most people. It's the polar opposite here. And conveying that over and over and beating into people's heads, like, this is art for everyone. This is photography for everyone. If you want to be a part of it is key. And another big differentiator there is just like the access that photographers have then with their collectors. It's immediate, it's direct, it's omnipresent, and there's no gatekeepers essentially if they really think about it. So I'm curious, in your mind, like, are you thinking about collector experience? Are you thinking about dynamics between photographers and their collectors? Like, what does that look like? What does that evolve into heading in the future? Any thoughts there?
Yeah. And I can't reiterate enough everything you just said and how important it is, because this is the sea change that we've all waited for, and really kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity in the sense where it's like we woke up one morning and we had the ability to kind of remove all the walls that we were born into, that we were told like, this is how this operates, and if you want to do this, you're going to have to do it on these terms. And we woke up one day and that world there was a whole new door open for us. And that connection is, I mean, that's, you look at what Justin did with Twin Flames, and like, that dude was in these discords talking with every collector, helping facilitate secondary sales if they wanted to, finding homes for the work, getting the work sold out, getting it in people's hands. And like, he kind of, in many ways, he kind of wrote a playbook early on of kind of how to approach this. And like, that's the cool thing about the space. Like, I can connect with every collector of mine in 5 minutes. And like, in the traditional photo world, I don't even know who owns some of my pieces a lot of the time. You know what I mean? There's always somebody in between, whether it's like a curator or a gallerist. But in this space, I can literally, like, my collector base, I can hit them all up in 5 minutes to be like, hey, I got a new project dropping or something like that, or check out this new artist's work. So that accessibility is what has kind of opened the door for this kind of ecosystem to flourish. So, but when it comes to, our responsibilities with that accessibility and what we have to do, we always have to kind of be building further and thinking in terms of what are these standards we're setting right now and how are they going to affect the space moving forward? Because it's only a matter of time time before like the big boys come in and try and dictate terms to us like they always have. And so right now the focus is very much on providing artists, as far as like for curated platforms, providing artists with revenue split shares that are hyper progressive, better than anything we've ever seen in the traditional space, that will stand up over time and make sure that they're fairly compensated and fairly paid for their work if they choose to like put a book out or debut in a curated platform. From the collector's standpoint, the discussion with artists is like, is making sure that we're very careful about how we handle, the way we put our work out, what we do with our work, making sure there's nothing kind of fishy going on around it, making sure that we maintain, the provenance and, we make sure that the people that invest in us are taken care of in the sense that they're kind of, protected, that we're continuing on as working artists and that we're committed to the space, and that, we're going to kind of continue to build this out because, like I said, it's like this is going to, like with everything in the space, like it's going to go in cycles. There's going to be new people that enter in. There's going to be new people that come in from traditional spaces that want to build, platforms or marketplaces, and they want to say like, okay, well, hey, this is how this is going to be now. And so I think that it's incredibly important. Maybe it's the most imperative thing that as artists in the space that are seeing success, that we're constantly building new experiences that are focused on making sure that artists are fairly compensated and making sure that the collectors are continually engaged and feel like they are not only a part of the ecosystem, but that they're being like rewarded with like, bold new experiences and ideas. And like, they feel like they are growing as collectors and patrons along with the space.
100%, man. I feel like fairly compensating these photographers who have, historically, much like the artists have to, essentially give away all their work for exposure in the hopes of like getting discovered or selling some pieces down the line. Giving them sustainable financial path forward, I think is massive, obviously. And obviously, the more people, you would think, obviously, the more people that catch on to it, the more people will continue to be onboarded and be keen onto the scene. Dude, one of the things we always love to ask our guests as we sort of get to a close here is to sort of peek into their crypto wallets and just genuinely interested in if there are things outside of your own project, either photographers or you mentioned PFPs or any other NFT projects that you are a big fan of or interested in or are collecting. Yeah, man, what do you got going on in your wallet?
Oh man, you don't want to. Well, I always joke. Well, you don't want to know the PFPs that I had access to that did not land in my wallet. But like everything in the crypto space, like I always, my approach when it comes to my personal collecting and engagement is like if I'm not fully committed to something where I can pay attention to it, there's no chance I ever would have held it to a place that it would have been. You know what I mean? I would have dumped it at 2 ETH or something like that. So I don't really collect that much stuff from the PFP space just because I'm so heavily involved in my kind of echo chamber photography that I don't have the time to commit to like really know where I need to be kind of sticking and moving. So, my personal work is really like I'll kind of gravitate to photographers that I find, are really kind of doing. It's a trade-off. It's like I think they're either doing something amazing, or I think that they're like a great artist, and I'm kind of getting in before they've blown up a little bit. So I collected a piece last week from this awesome dude Eric Paul Howard from this Lowrider series he did. He's this guy out of Detroit. It's pretty amazing. I'm waiting till I can get my hands on a Ruben Wu piece. His stuff's pretty wild, but he's a friend, and like I've loved his work. I own some Kris Graves stuff. I've got a piece from this guy Isaac Diggs that people don't really know about yet in the space, but they certainly will. I grabbed something from this artist's project called Behold the Ocean, which is like. Her name's Akosia. She's doing these mints. These are like generative like photo mints that fund an expedition to like document climate change scientific numbers. So that's like a really cool project. I would love to get one of these Soph pieces today, but I don't know if I'm going to make it in on that ETH. And there's a few quantum artists that I have my eyes on for collecting. I love the work of Nydia Blast, John Henry, and Matthew Albanese just has a collection launching soon that's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I was just scrolling through Matthew's collection over on Quantum. Actually, the feature image there, like the oil slick water and then the autumn foliage, just like kind of sniped everything that I love when it comes to.
Yeah, dude, it's so cool because so Chris and I went to undergraduate at SUNY Purchase, and like some of these like Matthew's a SUNY Purchase dude. So it's cool. It's like what Chris is doing is like he's onboarding all these artists that we work with in the traditional space into the NFT space now. And it's like, I can't say it enough. That man is getting artists paid. And when artists get paid, they get to work. They become stewards in the space. They start making the project they've always dreamed about. They start innovating. So we're starting to see this money and support come into the artists, and then we're starting to see what they do with it. And that's like, I don't know, I'm just continually amazed.
Dude, amen. I mean, getting artists paid, that's my number one focus. Like at Nifty over the past year, I've helped artists create collections that have generated over $140 million in sales revenue. It's effing crazy. And money is energy to artists, energy to do more of what they love, to fill this world with more art. It's honestly the best thing ever. Constantly inspiring, re-energizing, all the good things. But before we go, I definitely want to make sure that folks are up to date and apprised of everything that they need to know when it comes to KGP. And I know we have a launch date coming up. Let people know when that is. Let people know where they can sign up in advance so that they don't miss out on it, and let people know where they can follow you and the project.
Yeah, so definitely our site is kgpnft.com. You can hit that up for all the details on our upcoming releases. Everything's going to funnel through that. Definitely get on. We have a mailing list for our pre-sale access. We're partnered with HashQ Apps. We're going to do some really cool stuff with how we roll our mints out. But definitely get on that list. It is certainly getting some attention right now, and we're very excited about getting into our first launch. But yeah, follow us on Twitter as well at KGPNFT. We host a weekly Twitter Spaces where we bring together photographers in the space on like a topic, and we kind of have like a roundtable discussion. That's like a great way to kind of start getting your toes wet into photography. We've also been doing a campaign over the past month where once a day we pick a title from the history of photography, and we treat about the history of photo books running from 1850 to all the way up into modern time. So that's just a huge back catalog of like the history of photography we got going on. So first and foremost, we are kind of like we are a company that is built around education and being kind of stewards in the space. So everything we do is kind of built around introducing people into the history of photography, discussions around contemporary photography, and introducing them to artists.
Love it. Well, Marshall, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to jump on the Matthew and Rizzle show with us and talk about everything that you're doing with KGP NFT and then about NFT photography in general. It's one of the most interesting areas in NFT land for me personally. So again, thank you for everything that you shared, and just keep on creating, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I can't say it enough, but having the privilege to be on a platform and share is really kind of what ignites this space and what's so special about it. So I can't thank you enough for having me.
Yeah, thank you, man. Awesome project.
Thanks.
Where's that robot lady?
I'm trying to figure it out.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Proof of Beauty. Proof of Beauty is an experimental digital experience studio. The blockchain is their canvas and the tokens are their brush. You can learn more about Proof of Beauty by checking out pob.studio. You can follow them on Twitter as well at PRRF Beauty. That's PRRF Beauty on Twitter, and pob.studio on their homepage to learn more about their projects like Hash, London, and Publico. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.